engine.
Did these different iterations of engines, the 5 Chryslers, the turbine, and then the Ford engine, was that in the same chassis, like a Sherman tank chassis?
Yeah, the same engine compartment.
Yeah.
So, when you were, during your training period, were you, in cavalry, once you're assigned to your unit, you were preparing to deploy, obviously, and in a cavalry unit. What can you tell us about, as an officer at this point, you obviously had command of a platoon?
Yeah, I was a command in the maintenance platoon first.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had we had one tank in the platoon, and I had my jeep, and we had a couple half tracks, and it was our job to keep the tanks running. And see, I was the maintenance officer. Even when I went overseas, I was always still in charge of the maintenance platoon. And I didn't take over platoon, a regular platoon, until we ran short on officers because of casualties. And there was, at one time then, I was still in the maintenance department, maintenance tank, and this tank, I was in a separate tank battalion, and we were assigned to infantry divisions. The battalion was assigned, one battalion assigned to each division of infantry. And they split up the battalions and split them to the different companies. During the action, we lost a couple officers, and a mission came up that this platoon was supposed to run, and he didn't have, the sergeant who was running it, he had to go back to headquarters and said, "Could you send me an officer? We got something coming up." Well, I was a maintenance officer, but they right away, I don't know if it's a promotion or not, but I became a platoon leader then.
Ah, okay.
And so I had to take over that. And my first active mission was the 6th Mountain Division, the SS Mountain Division had counterattacked, and they surrounded this small village full of infantry. And they gave me, with the company of infantry and my 5 tanks, we had a mission of busting into that town and relieving the town, which we did. That was my first.
We'll definitely get to that. I'm still interested in cavalry versus armor training. In the Army today, there are armored units and there are armored cavalry units. They have somewhat of a different mission, but if there were no separate army units, did you serve as a movement to contact type armor unit, or did you serve as a recon and screening like cavalry?
No, we were right to the front line with the infantry. Yeah. In fact, our company had one kind of a great condition. At one time, we were given not given accolade because we had 168 continuous days in combat. Because we were attached to these infantry companies. When infantry companies were replaced, and then replaced from fresh troops, we stayed right with them. We kept staying in the constant, and we had that many consecutive days in contact with the enemy.
Wow. So back in the States, before you deployed, you trained. You were finally assigned to a armored platoon as a platoon leader. And you knew, obviously, deployment was coming. In your type of unit, you probably didn't expect to get deployed to the Pacific. Did you train with Europe in mind, or? Actually,
yes. Yeah. We all anticipated that we would be going to Europe.
So the day to deploy came from North America to overseas, and what can you tell us about that?
Well, actually, I wasn't overseas as long as a lot of them because of the fact that the first 2 years that I was in fact, the first year and a half, we still had horses.
Yeah.
And so by the time they gave us the tanks, and we had to start from scratch again. So I was, like I say, I was drafted in 40, and I didn't go overseas until 43.
So a lot of time on in North America before you were deployed. So you deployed in 43. Your unit deployed as a whole? Did 43 would have been? Well, you would. I presume you were either deployed to England or to North Africa and Sicily, or?
No, we went directly to France.
Oh, in 43, not
44.
44.
44.
44. Okay.
44, yeah.
So that was after
After
North
we
D-Day,
we were involved in the invasion.
Okay.
We went into Normandy August, I think it was.
So did you deploy to the beaches, or did they have the ports secured yet?
No, we went into Bastogne. No, not Bastogne. No, it's the main port there in Normandy. Cherbourg.
I was there last summer.
Yes, forgive me.
Yeah, so, yeah, by that time, it took them about, what, 90 days after the invasion to get Cherbourg secured. So you deployed there and you were, and then you moved to the front.
Yeah, our battalion, the first active wasn't until October, I think it was.
And that was in what region?
Well, that was in Metz.
Which is,
Our battalion was quite active in the battle for Metz.
okay.
Which Pat had the honor, if you call it that. Metz, the first time that Metz had ever been taken over by the armored force since 1500 or something, I think, something like that. Yeah.
So was that your first, the first shot you heard fired in anger, or did you get any harassment before then?
No, it was in Metz, yeah.
So Metz was the first actual engagement with the enemy. So what was that like? The first time you actually closed in with the enemy?
Well, of course, I was still in maintenance then, and so my first contact with the enemy was we got in the edge of Germany. Our tanks were across the river in town, and I took my crew in the town to repair a tank that had lost a track. And of course, when the crowd heard that I was working on the tank, I drew mortar fire, and that was the first time that I saw mortar fire. I remember my sergeant put me down on the ground. Get down, Lieutenant, get down.
So it was, yeah, mortar fire, and then, but you were on the Allied side of the river. You were taken from across. So you had to cross the river. Yeah. And bridges available or no?
The bridge was one that was taken intact.
Oh, okay.
There was one bridge in that area that was taken intact.
So the infantry secured the bridge, and you moved the armored units across the bridge. And did you? And go on. What was?
Well, I was going to say something. That bridge has a little memory for me because my brother-in-law was in the 26th Armored Division, and 26th Armored Division is the one that took that bridge, and he was part of the guard that was guarding that bridge. And so the chances are that he was guarding that bridge when I crossed to go into France.
But you didn't see him.
No, that would have been quite a thing if I had.
That would have been something. So you go on, please, to what came in terms of your experiences after your first contact, how you progressed. You moved across France and towards the Rhine.
I'll tell you, when I came back from that first brush, then I had a little blood on my face. I guess it would probably be some rock or pebble or something that scratched my face. And it said, "Why don't you go and get a Purple Heart?" There's no way I would do that because in June, my twin brother was shot through the chest in Normandy. survived. When he spent 6 days in the hospital, he got a Purple Heart for that, and I was gonna take a Purple Heart for a scratch.
Yeah, you would have been competitive with him the rest of your life in that regard. So did you see much combat in France?
Not in France. Our real combat was when we hit the secret line.
So you reached the Rhine in, I guess probably what, early 44? Late 43? Late 44, early 45, I meant to say, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the end of November, 1st of December.
Okay.
And of course, we fought at the secret line until March. We didn't bust out of there until March.
Siegfried Line, that by the way is in World War I was called the Hindenburg Line, which is what the men from Ely broke near St. Quentin that resulted in our post being called the St. Quentin Post. So more combat in the same area during World War I and World War II, resulting in St. Quentin Post in Ely. So you spent a lot of time there in that part of it.
Yeah, like I say, we fought most of it in the town of Sarlon. And it would take us, 2 months to bust out through there.
Were they dug in or?
Yeah, the town was part of the secret line, and make sure the houses were fortified, and actually most of the houses were just like another pillbox, and they just couldn't.
Were your supply lines fluid? Were they able to get you what you needed pretty readily?
And of course, another thing that took so long, see, when the bulge struck, then all the effort in our section was kind of dampened, and they moved the troops. They moved these divisions. Pat had us raise division, make a 90-degree turn to go up and relieve the bulge.
Oh yeah.
So actually, our front was kind of static. About all we did was we had to spread around enough to cover all the areas that they had left, and so we were in a position doing offensive maneuvering. So we were just stationary.
So that was a harsh winter.
Yes, it was.
My understanding is harsh for that region, even much generally a harder winter than they usually experience there.
In fact, I could tell you a little story. Like I say, my twin brother was in the 90th Infantry, and this was in the December, and he had been wounded, and he was in England in the hospital from June until August, and they went back online. And the 90th Division and my battalion were never more than 25 miles apart, so I knew very well most of the time. And so the 9th Division had made a bridgehead across the Rhine, across the Saar River, and they're in the town of Dillingen. And so I had, of course, I was in maintenance, then I had a Jeep, and so I knew where he was, so I went up to see him, I thought I'd go visit him. And so I found his headquarters, and they told me, he says, well, he's over across the river, but if you stay here until tonight, when he's done the supplies over for the outfit, then you can go and check and see, go look at it for him. And so I waited, and then before the time came, they told me, they came to me, well, you can't go over it, this thing's been changed. And that was when the bulge struck. Mm-hmm. And so the 90th Division was one of the divisions was pulled out of line and sent north. And my brother told me afterward that they had been on the bridgehead in Dillingen, and when they pulled out, they brought their wounded with them, but they had to leave the head dead behind. Mm. And they were swinging up to relieve the bulge.
Wow. So, do you recall the moment when you first crossed into Germany?
No, the line, the boundary just wasn't that. It wasn't any sign saying entering Germany.
Welcome to Germany.
But you do remember the first time you arrived on the Rhine.
Oh yeah.
And the Rhine was pretty much, I think, except at Remagen, all the bridges were blown.
Well, by the time it reached the Rhine, I was company commander then, because we had lost many officers, and I had a ranking. In the Army, the rank went by the top, not line of service, and my commission was, I'd been commissioned a couple of years before, and so I was ranking officer, so I was company commander then. And I was company commander until after the war ended. Well, the day the war ended, I think it was I was discharged from the hospital, and I went back and I was company commander until for 4 or 5 months till they sent me home.
So, stepping back a little bit, I kind of neglected to talk about the bulge. What role did your unit play in the Battle of the Bulge?
There again, we're the same thing. We spread out, to cover the areas that had been vacated by the
Germans. So
it was just kind of a static.
Holding.
Yeah, holding.
Hold ground, yeah. So you reached the Rhine. How'd you cross the Rhine?
Pardon?
How did you cross the Rhine?
Well, Pat kind of sneaked over. We got as far as the Rhine. Of course, then we pulled back for 2 days while the engineers building a bridge across the Rhine. And I think about 2 o'clock in the morning, we start crossing the Rhine. And
Was there a short straw to be the first tank across there? I mean, going across on an impromptu bridge on foot is a lot different than going across on a heavy piece of machinery.
And we crossed in the middle of the night, and I don't know how many were ahead of us.
Yeah.
Did you face any harassing fire, or they had that pretty well secured on the far bank?
We sneaked around pretty close. There was very little fighting. The actual crossing, we made that without any defense.
So during all this, I know that from even prior to D-Day that the Allies had air superiority. Did you see any German aircraft at all during?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they did get some through, even though.
Yeah, well, they were very, we saw very little of them, but the skies were pretty well cleared up.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I will say this, that after we got into Germany, then our tank column was strafed by a P-47, our own plane.
Yeah.
And
Friendly fire isn't.
Yeah, the only thing I can remember, think he didn't expect to see American tanks that far into Germany.
Sure.
And our company commander was hit then. That's when I inherited the company.
Ah, okay. Yeah, in fact, as I've read, there was a lot of threat from when your Allied aircraft. By 1945, there's probably more risk from Allied aircraft than from German aircraft if you were on the front line.
And they call that friendly fire, but there's sure nothing friendly
There's
about
nothing
it.
friendly about it, right? Once you got into Germany, did you see civilians?
Oh, yeah.
And how did they? What can you tell us about the civilians you encountered when you first invaded Germany?
Well, when you hit Germany, we were moving then. We were traveling 7 miles every day, and we'd stop at night in a village. And in fact, I still remember the little German that I learned. Raus mit you schlafen Keller, so der schlafen here. We'd go into the houses and chase them out of the basement, we'd take over the house.
Yeah, and tell them to exit. Yeah, and did they? I assume they complied without hesitation.
Yeah.
Did they? What else can you tell us about the civilians you encountered? Were they morose? Were they compliant? Were they angry? Do you have any recollection?
Well, they just kind of cowed.
Yeah, I would expect.
Yeah.
So once you're in Germany, things started kind of rolling up pretty quickly in '45, correct?
Yeah.
So you moved pretty quickly across Germany.
Yeah.
And tell us about any combat you experienced in Germany after crossing the Rhine?
Well, I can tell you about one that, like I say, we were traveling and staying in the villages at night. And this one night, and we stopped from the village, and the company commander and the artillery observer and I and my sergeant, we went to the edge of the town to survey the terrain that we'd be attacking over the next day. And Krob saw us there and cut loose with screaming mimes, these rockets.
Yeah.
And of course, we just hit the ground, and they used to tell us, don't worry about the screaming mimes. They make a lot of noise, but they don't do any damage. But I got hit, the one that took me out. It also took out my sergeant. It went, a piece went to his foot, and I heard later that he was crippled the rest of his life. And the artillery observer got the side of his face taken off. And then anyhow, that's.
So as you moved across Germany, it sounds like you went into Bavaria. Is that correct?
We went into Czechoslovakia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But of course,
But you traveled across Bavaria to Czechoslovakia, I assume.
Well, of course, I wasn't with him when he went to the war end, because shortly after this happened, like I said, I had already got a piece of shrapnel in my chest, but I didn't go to the medics. So I went to the medics, but I didn't go. And I just took 2 or 3 days off. Mm-hmm. And during that time, then the first sergeant took over my tank, and that's the only time my tank was destroyed. Then, well, can I digress just a little?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I went in the tank, but my tank, the sergeant, was hit by 88, and shell went through the driver's compartment, and of course it killed him. It slaughtered my commander, my driver. But then the tank caught fire, and the rest of the crew escaped, and we had to wait until the next day for it cooled off before we could get the driver out. And so the next day, then I went with the guys with the truck to get my driver out. And one guy, there were 3 of them, and one guy, the 2 of them went into the tank, and one guy died in the driver's body, and he was taking out the parts of the body of my driver, the pieces of the left of it, so that one in the truck, and the other put it to the one on the ground, and they put that in a mattress cover, because that's what they always use to get all the bodies in Europe, and people don't know that, these mattress covers done. And they brought my driver out in pieces and put in the mattress cover. And the reason I mention this is because I've seen other things before. In fact, I'll tell you another one about these grave registration people. One time we came across an area where that shell itself had got some other infantrymen. There must have been 10 or 15 infantrymen all in a group, because they just slaughtered them, just blew them to pieces. And while I stopped my tank to watch them a little bit, and these grave registration guys were picking up these body parts and putting them in the inventory. And I heard one guy say to his buddy, he said, "Well, that's about enough for one body." And so I left then. And this is what I wanted to mention. In all the time since the war, I've never heard anything to compliment or tell me what these grave registration guys did. Because this was their life. That's what they did. Pick up these dead bodies and take care of them. And they never have gotten any credit for it. And I never thought too much about it until last Memorial Day. Some reason or another, I got to thinking about that. I got to thinking about these guys. There must be thousands of several companies on there that was their job to clean up the mess. And I've never heard anything ever to compliment them or give credit for what they did.
And not only is it a dirty job, but it's also a very honorable job because it lets families back at home know that the remains were recovered and that we know what happened to them, to avoid having more unknown soldiers than we have to have, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
So the 88 millimeter, German 88 millimeter, I could cut through any tank.
Their tanks were so far superior to ours. That the only way we could, in tank-to-tank battle, the only way we could win, we were much faster, and we could outmaneuver them, and we had to get them in from the side, because our shells would not pierce their front armor.
Right.
And then our front armor, with the 88, they go right through them.
Yeah.
And I still say that the reason we won the war is because we had so many men and so much equipment, and we just outproduced them. And actually, there were times when we'd take a bunch of prisoners, and they couldn't believe what they saw when they came around our lines. The amount of equipment we had, the tanks and the trucks and everything. And we just had so much motion material that
They never got rid of their horses.
they're still using horse-drawn artillery, yes.
I read a story, D-Day from the German point of view, and a German prisoner who was captured and taken down to the beach knew the war was over because he didn't see a single horse on that the Americans, British were bringing. They said if they have enough oil to power all of these vehicles, the war's over.
Yeah.
So in Germany, you went all the way to Czechoslovakia.
My company did, 'cause like I say, I ended up in the hospital.
Yeah.
This woman got infection, and so I went to the hospital, and I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And the war ended the day I was discharged from the hospital.
Do you know if your unit linked up with the Soviets in Czechoslovakia, or
No.
they did not, or you don't know?
I don't believe they did.
Yeah. So the war ended to everyone's relief. That was a happy day.
Yeah, when I returned back to my outfit, then I resumed command of the company. I was still the commander, and so we just made things as easy as possible for about 4 or 5 months until I moved home. And I had enough points. I was about the first one in the battalion. I was one of the first to be sent home. I had been in so long, and I did have a wife and a baby that I'd never seen.
So I did see the article in the Gazette, front page of the Gazette, meeting up with your brothers in Germany.
Yeah. Yes, my brother-in-law, he was in the 26th Division, and we at that time we were in Austria, because we went as far as Austria. And then when the Russians took over Austria, they pushed us back in Czechoslovakia. But he was in Austria, so I knew where he was, and I knew where my twin brother was. My twin brother was near Nuremberg, and he knew where my oldest brother was. So I picked up my brother-in-law, and we drove to see my twin brother, and he furnished about two or three bottles of rye whiskey that he had. One of his men had a still in the basement and was making rye whiskey. So, and then we located my older brother, and so we had a reunion. That's the picture that's on that book that we took.
So what can you tell us about what Germany was like following the war? After the surrender, I mean.
It was ruins. We couldn't believe, we said that the cities like Nuremberg and Frankfurt, we should not ever rebuild them. they were completely ruined. And I can't, of course, I've been here a few times since then, and there's very few signs of that war. I don't know how they ever did it, but the country was completely demolished. Of course, the villages weren't too bad, but the cities where they've been through all that bombing and stuff.
Yeah.
When we went to Nuremberg, then they had to take bulldozers and bulldoze the streets so the tanks could get through. They had to use, the bulldozers had to go in first before the tanks did. Make it so you could get through the town.
Utter destruction.
Yeah, utter destruction.
So you you came home. That was a happy day.
Happy day.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I met my wife when I was in Fort Knox at maintenance school. And I met her there, and she won't mind this stuff. But anyhow, it's kind of a good story about how we met. That was when I was in tank maintenance school, and I and two other officers went into town on a Sunday afternoon, and we were walking down the street, and we went past the theater, and there three ladies came out of the theater. So we followed them, and we struck up a conversation with them, and talked them into having dinner with us. So we went to dinner, and then we talked them into another, gave them another nectar or something. And so my courtship was in Louisville, while I was during this tank maintenance school. And what we had done, the school was in two shifts, morning shift and afternoon shift. And we took the afternoon shift so that we could sleep all morning. And put our shift in right after we got through the school, we head for town. So I had quite a bit of time to escort or but anyhow, my wife never wanted me to tell how we met. It looked like a pickup or something. I will say in her defense, we were officers, and officers are supposed to be gentlemen anyhow.
I've heard that. So did she stay in Louisville during the war?
Yeah, well, she stayed, I took her home, before I went overseas, I took her to a town called Fancy Farm, Kentucky.
Fancy Farm, Kentucky.
Near Mayfield.
So that's where when you came home to her there from Europe. And then you brought her to Iowa.
Yeah, she met the train at Mayfield, and I went home, went to see me with her parents, and I went with also my son, who I'd never seen before.
Oh.
And after about a week, then I took her to Iowa, and we went from there.
So who else has questions about World War II? I want to ask you a little bit about Ely. You remember it's early Ely before the war, but before we get to that, what other questions? What have I left out that I should have asked about World War II?
I got one. Lieutenant, did you ever run into any German prisoners of war? Or you captured? Did you ever have?
We saw
maybe I missed that maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, we saw thousands of them.
Okay.
Yeah, they were, at the end of the war, they were just given up by the thousands, and there'd be columns of them, and just they would walk, we'd go toward the Germany, and they were walking. And
Okay.
I can tell you one we thought it was kind of funny at the time, but during war things got a little crude, and just at one time then we had we were with the infantry, and the infantry were processing the soldiers, and then they sent them back. And they had this one guy that was escorting the prisoners back, and they come back and they got to thinking he was coming back pretty quick. And then they found out later that he was taking them back to a tank ditch and shooting them and letting them lay in the tank ditch. And so, you know, you hear a lot of rapping, but we're not lily white either, you know. We've got things that too soon.
You probably saw even more than your fair share, because I'm given to understand that by the time you would have gotten to Central Germany, a lot of them were running from the Soviets and wanted to surrender to the Americans or the British rather than surrender to the
Thank you.
Soviets, which would have been not a pleasant experience.
Another kind of interesting story. One of the other officers in my company, or in my was a German from a man of colonies. And we met in training, and the way we met, he was assigned to our company. And one time, then he was in the office in the order room, and he saw where I had applied for leave to go to Ely, Iowa. So he looked me up, he looked at me, and he says, "You used to play baseball for Ely." I looked at him. You were the catcher for the Manor.
That's awesome.
But anyhow, he would think about it. He spoke beautiful German. In fact, he spoke better German than most of the Germans do, because he's had a more the educated type of German that he was using. And so anytime we captured prisoners, we'd have him interview the prisoners, interrogate them. And finally one time, we were online, and we always had to pull back at night in the infantry, because we didn't have night vision then. And the night in the infantry was big foxholes ahead of us, in front of us. They always say, "We'll take care of you, we'll take care of you." And this one night, then the German came with his hands up and hollering in German, but he wanted to surrender. And so Dutch we call it a shot Dutch. Dutch guided him toward his tank. When he got close enough, he took a spat, he shot it, put a Panzerfaust, and shot a Panzerfaust through his tank. Unfortunately,
Big bazooka.
yeah, nobody was killed. But after that, when he interrogated prisoners, he had his hands around their throat.
What other questions do we have for Mr. Krob regarding World War II?
I might apologize. Never tried. My wife told me I do chatter too much.
No. That's what we're here to hear. We're all here today to hear you chatter. So you were born here in the Ely area, and
My twin brother were born 5 minutes apart, and my brother had a distinction. When he was born, he beat on the doctor's tie.
and you're still talking about it. So, did you live in town here? Which wasn't much of a town then,
We
but
lived in town. My dad ran the elevator.
yeah. And what are your earliest memories of Ely?
Well, let's see. I know the population was 64.
Yeah, and it was just this downtown area, right? Right, a couple blocks around the main street here, Dallas.
I always just grew up with little kids playing games and go into town at night. You know, they have to be home shortly after dark.
Yeah,
I mean, just
and it was all dirt roads
oh yeah.
and mud roads when we had weather like this.
Yeah.
It was a journey to Cedar Rapids, I assume, much more than it is today.
Yeah, well, it's really, you could go to Cedar Rapids, you use the train usually. Because the passenger train would go through in the morning, and the passenger train come back in the evening, and
Avoid the mud that way.
yeah.
Do you remember what it cost?
No, yeah.
So, when you were a boy, the Legion was just formed, and I know they had their first meeting here in the building that has the post office now, but they moved a couple schools over and put them together for the original Legion Hall.
That's right, yep,
Do you have any memories of that old building?
yep, I do.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, like you say, they put those two buildings together, you know, and then they hired a basketball guy for a basketball coach, and he didn't have any basketball court. And I can happen to remember at the time that they talked a lot about how about remodeling this Legion Hall for basketball court. And I remember the coach, you're looking at him, fix the walls were plaster, and he said, well, yes, I think it could be done, but the roof has to be raised. And by God, they did. They raised the roof and made a basketball court out of those two buildings.
And the Ely school played their games there.
The school played their games
Do you remember other events that were held at the Legion Hall when you were young?
Well, when I was a little older, I can remember that my family, we had a little dance band. My brother's name was Vic. We called it Vic's Merrymakers, and we played Czech music, and we would play for dances in that Legion Hall.
How about the CSPS Hall here in town? Do you remember that?
Yes. In fact, my dad, right at the start of the war, he moved into town and he built a little house right next to that CSPS Hall, and he bought the CSPS Hall. We owned it.
Oh.
Yeah. Used for storage and stuff.
And what can you tell us about the CSPS Hall? Kind of I know they had dances, and I've even heard tell they had some illegal gambling going on in there.
Yeah, I was a little bit too young to in those days, because by the time I remember it was after he had bought it, you know, those dances took place, and I was too young to participate in them.
Yeah. So back to the Legion. You remember, we talked briefly, you remember a lot of the charter members.
Oh, yes.
Most of them even, probably. Have any recollections of any of those old World War I, and I think a couple of Spanish-American war vets even? Do you have any recollection of those guys you'd like to share with us?
Okay, Joe Chesney. He was a good card. Yeah, he liked to lick a little bit, but he was up until he was in the 60s or 70s. If he had a few drinks, he could stand on his head on the chair.
That's a good one. During those days, following World War I, World War II, the Legion was quite a bit. We're proud of what we have today, but it was a really huge organization in those days, right? Those guys were really involved in everything. Even law enforcement to a certain deputized and things like that. Do you have any memory of that sort of thing?
No.
Yeah.
But my dad was active in the Legion, and he was real proud of it. In fact, when I came home to leave, I remember one time I was home to leave in the Army, and the Legion met, and he took me to the Legion meeting. And I don't think I signed up that time. I'm not sure just exactly when I signed up. But anyhow, it was long enough ago that I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I got a framed certificate from the Legion thanking me for being a member of the Legion for 70 consecutive years.
Congratulations. That's a great accomplishment. What else can you tell us about Ely as a young man prior to the war, prior to World War II, the 30s, Depression? Do you have any memories of that era in Ely?
Oh, it's kind of simple. It's maybe kind of stupid. But like I say, us kids, hey, we had the run of the town, and on Halloween, then for one thing, we did the council met in this council in the city hall, which is right on the corner on this block, and for some I don't know how we got the idea. We got a piece of paper and painted it green and made it look like a dollar bill, And we put that on the step with a string tied to it and hide it right in that corner.
Well, you didn't have video games.
So we wait for them to find that, and so the first guy stepped out, he said, "Here's the $1 bill with a string tied to it."
In high school, how big what was the size of your class? How many classmates did you have?
Well, let's see, the class that I graduated in had 10 students, 10 graduates.
Wow.
And I assume you went over here, what we now call the community center, is that your?
No.
And you mentioned baseball, you played some baseball.
I played baseball and basketball.
How'd you gather a team? How far did you have to go to other communities to get a baseball team together from small schools like this?
No, we had a baseball team.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, our baseball team was pretty good. In fact, we won the county tournament one year.
Yeah.
And we always maintained that we could have been even a better team, except it only had 4 guys that could shoot a back without getting sick.
Oh, man.
That was a requisite, huh?
What other questions we have for Mr. Krob while we have his attention? Well, maybe we have some one-on-one discussion if you've got a few more minutes.
Sure.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your life's experience with us. It's very enlightening, and it's good to remember the past and think about it. I'm particularly glad to see it. I haven't read your book yet. I scanned an early, your grandson's book. Grandfather? Mm-hmm. Your grandson's book. I scanned an early copy, but I think since my outdoor activities this weekend are going to be curtailed by the weather, I think maybe I'll read it this afternoon.
Well, I got that book just two days ago, and I haven't read it yet either.
Oh. Then I don't feel so bad.
I've heard so much about it, I think I'm going to read it tonight before I go to sleep.
Maybe you'll find out something. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.